There is an X-ray from 1908 that I need you to see, not the image itself, which is in a medical archive. The description, because the description is enough. The X-ray shows the rib cage of a living woman. The lower ribs are compressed inward, deformed from their natural curvature into a shape that no human skeleton is born with. The floating ribs are displaced. The lower thorax is narrowed to a circumference that the radiologist noted was several inches smaller than the anatomical minimum for an adult female of that height and frame. The liver is pushed downward, the stomach is compressed, the diaphragm is restricted to approximately 60% of its normal range of motion. The woman in the X-ray is not injured, she is not ill, she is not the victim of an accident or a congenital deformity. She is wearing a corset. She has been wearing one since she was approximately 13 years old, and the bones of her body have been permanently reshaped by the garment she was told was necessary. This is not ancient history. This is 1908, within the living memory of people your grandparents could have known. The corset was the standard undergarment for women in the Western world for roughly 400 years, from the early 1500s through the early 1900s. 4 centuries, 16 generations of women, billions of woman hours spent inside a rigid structure of whalebone, steel, and fabric that compressed the rib cage, restricted the lungs, displaced the internal organs, and reshaped the skeleton itself through sustained mechanical pressure applied from puberty onward. And the modern world treats this as a fashion choice, as an aesthetic preference that women adopted because they wanted smaller waists, as if the corset were a voluntary expression of beauty standards rather than a mandatory garment enforced through social coercion, so total that a woman who appeared in public without one was treated as indecent. As if the crushing of the female rib cage for 400 years were a quirky historical footnote rather than one of the longest-running campaigns of physical control over a population in recorded history. This raises a simple but critical question. What did women wear before the corset? The deeper I went, the more I found that the answer to this question is the answer that the entire history of the corset exists to obscure. Because what women wore before the corset was something so simple, so functional, so completely aligned with the body's own structure that the 400 years of mechanical compression that followed look less like fashion evolution and more like deliberate deformation. Before the corset, women wore breastbands, soft wrappings, fabric supports that worked with the body's anatomy rather than against it, the strophium of ancient Rome, the mastodeton of ancient Greece, the various cloth bindings depicted in Minoan art where women are shown in garments that support the bust while leaving the rib cage completely free. For thousands of years, across every documented civilization, women supported their breasts with soft, flexible, non-restrictive garments that accomplished the functional goal of support without any of the skeletal deformation that the corset would later produce. The ancient approach wasn't primitive. It was sophisticated in its simplicity. The breastband distributed the weight of the bust across the shoulders and upper back without compressing the ribs. The lungs were free. The diaphragm was unrestricted. The internal organs sat in their anatomically correct positions. The spine maintained its natural curvature. The body was supported. The body was not reshaped. The distinction between support and compression is the distinction between a garment that serves the body and a garment that the body is forced to serve. The silence was deafening when I started looking at how the transition from band to corset happened. As if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand, the corset emerged in Europe in the early 1500s. The timing is specific and the context is revealing. The corset appeared during the same period that produced the most rigid social hierarchies in European history, The same period that codified class through clothing. The same period that produced sumptuary laws dictating what each class could wear, what colors, what fabrics, what shapes were permitted for which social position. The corset wasn't born from fashion. It was born from control, from a social system that required the body itself to be a display of status, a performance of class, a visible marker of the wearer's position in a hierarchy that was being formalized through the regulation of every visible surface. And the corset did something that no previous garment had done. It didn't dress the body, it reshaped it. The corset imposed an artificial silhouette on the female form, a silhouette that no human body produces naturally, a waist-to-hip ratio that requires the mechanical compression of the ribcage to achieve. The body inside the corset was not the body that existed without it. The corset created a new body, an artificial body. A body whose proportions were determined not by genetics or health or natural development, but by the garment. The deeper I went into the medical literature of the 18th and 19th centuries, the more I found that physicians documented the damage in real time. This wasn't hidden knowledge. It wasn't a secret that only modern medicine could reveal. Doctors in the 1700s and 1800s were publishing detailed accounts of the injuries the corset produced: broken ribs, displaced organs, restricted breathing that produced chronic oxygen deprivation, fainting spells that the era attributed to feminine delicacy, but that were, in documented medical cases, the direct result of corset-induced respiratory restriction, digestive dysfunction from compressed stomachs and intestines, spinal deformation, muscular atrophy in the trunk and core, because the corset replaced the function of the muscles, and muscles that aren't used atrophy, meaning that the longer a woman wore a corset, the less her body could function without one. This last point is critical, because the corset created its own dependency. A woman who had worn a corset since puberty, whose core muscles had atrophied from years of disuse, whose skeleton had been reshaped by sustained compression, literally could not stand upright without the corset. The garment that had weakened her body became the only thing holding her body up. The device that had caused the damage became the treatment for the damage. The woman was trapped inside a feedback loop of structural dependency that no individual act of will could break, because her own anatomy had been modified to require the device that was destroying it. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across every system of physical control I've investigated. The foot bound in a shoe that deforms it until the shoe is needed to walk. The jaw underdeveloped by soft food until the dentist is needed to straighten the teeth. And the torso weakened by a corset until the corset is needed to stand. Each system creates the dependency it then serves. Each device weakens the body into requiring the device. The control is structural, architectural, written into the bones. Here's where the history becomes specifically about power rather than fashion. Because the corset didn't just reshape the body, it restricted it. A corseted woman couldn't breathe deeply, couldn't bend freely, couldn't run, couldn't lift, couldn't perform any vigorous physical activity without risking injury or fainting. The corset made the female body physically dependent, physically limited, physically incapable of the independent action that an unrestricted body could perform. And this incapability was called femininity. The inability to breathe deeply was called delicacy. The tendency to faint was called sensitivity. The inability to perform physical labor was called refinement. The physical restrictions produced by a garment were reframed as natural characteristics of the female body. Women were delicate not because they were corseted, but because they were women. Women fainted not because they couldn't breathe, but because they were sensitive. The garment produced the condition. The culture attributed the condition to nature, and the attribution justified the garment. The deeper I went into the social history of the corset, the more this circular logic revealed itself as the engine of the entire system. The corset weakens the body. The weakened body is presented as natural female frailty. The frailty is used to justify the woman's exclusion from public life, from physical labor, from independent action, from every domain that requires a body capable of unrestricted movement. And the exclusion is enforced by the garment that created the frailty. The woman is kept in the corset because she is frail. She is frail because she is kept in the corset. The prison produces the prisoner's need for the prison. Now, the liberation. Because the corset was eventually abandoned, and the story of its abandonment is presented as one of the great moments of women's emancipation. The early 1900s, the suffrage movement, the changing roles of women during World War I, women entering the workforce, women needing to move. The corset was discarded. The bra replaced it. Freedom was achieved. Progress happened. And the deeper I went into what actually replaced the corset, the more the liberation narrative started to dissolve. Because the bra, the garment that was presented as the liberation from the corset, was designed by the same industry that had produced the corset, the same manufacturers, the same retailers, the same commercial infrastructure that had sold the corset for 4 centuries shifted within a decade to selling the bra. The prison was redesigned, made more comfortable, made less visibly oppressive, made compatible with the new economic reality that required women's labor outside the home. But the fundamental principle that the female body required a commercial garment to be acceptable in public was never questioned. It was transferred from the corset to the bra, from one product to another product made by the same industry for the same market. The deeper I went into the early bra industry, the more I found that the bra wasn't marketed as freedom from the corset's restrictions. It was marketed as a continuation of the corset's function by different means. The same shaping, the same lifting, the same artificial silhouette imposed on a body that, without the garment, looked different from the garment's promise. The bra was lighter, more comfortable, less damaging to the skeleton. These were genuine improvements, but the underlying proposition that the female body in its natural state is unacceptable and requires a commercial product to achieve an acceptable shape was identical. Here's where the modern research becomes relevant. Because the health consequences of the bra, while dramatically less severe than those of the corset, follow the same structural pattern, the same dependency creation, the same muscular atrophy, the same feedback loop. Go read the research on bra wearing and breast tissue support. Studies have documented that the Cooper's ligaments, the connective tissue structures that provide natural breast support, respond to mechanical loading the same way all connective tissue does. Use strengthens them. Disuse weakens them. A breast that is externally supported by a bra receives less mechanical stimulus on its natural support structures. The ligaments weaken. The breast becomes more dependent on external support. The woman who wears a bra constantly develops breasts that are less capable of self-support than the woman who doesn't. The garment creates the condition it claims to treat. The research is contested. The bra industry funds studies that contradict it. The medical establishment offers mixed opinions, but the structural parallel to the corset is unmistakable. A garment that replaces a body function, a body that atrophies in the replaced function, a dependency that deepens with continued use, a commercial product that sells the solution to a problem it creates. And here's the thread that connects the corset to the bra, to the breastband, to the deepest pattern I've found. Because before all of these garments, the human breast didn't need support. Not because ancient women had different anatomy, because ancient women had different musculature, different posture, different relationships to their own bodies. The pectoral muscles, the serratus anterior, the upper back musculature that provides the structural foundation for breast support, were developed through daily physical activity that modern sedentary life doesn't provide. The ancient woman who carried water, who ground grain, who worked with her arms and her back and her chest every day, developed the muscular infrastructure that made external breast support minimally necessary. The breastband was light because the body was strong. The corset became heavy because the body was weakened. The bra sits between the two, supporting a body that could support itself if the conditions that built the supporting musculature hadn't been eliminated by the same industrialization that created the garment industry. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. The body's natural capability is reduced by industrial living. The reduction creates a market for a product that replaces the lost capability. The product further reduces the capability by eliminating the remaining stimulus for its maintenance. The dependency deepens, the market grows, and the original capability, the body's own ability to do what the product does, is forgotten so thoroughly that suggesting its existence sounds like fantasy. I'm not telling you to throw away your bra. The modern body exists in modern conditions. The musculature that would make external support unnecessary has been reduced by the same sedentary, industrial living that reduced every other physical capability the pre-industrial body maintained. You live in the world that exists, not the world that was. But I'm asking why the female body was compressed in a skeletal deforming cage for 400 years, and the era is remembered as fashion rather than control. I'm asking why the liberation from the corset produced not freedom from commercial body shaping, but a transfer to a different commercial product made by the same industry. I'm asking why the research suggesting that the replacement product creates its own dependency is contested by an industry that profits from the dependency. I'm asking why the body that sustained itself through natural musculature for the entire history of the species before the corset was introduced is treated as inherently insufficient without a product that was invented 4 centuries ago. I'm asking what the female body could do if it had never been told it needed help standing up, what the rib cage would look like if it had never been compressed, what the core musculature would feel like if it had never been replaced by whalebone and wire, what the breast would do if the ligaments that support it had never been made redundant by a garment that the body didn't ask for and that the industry won't let the body learn to live without. I'm asking who decided the female body was insufficient, and who has been profiting from that decision for 400 years.